that I'm considering a lot the Lee Bollinger's book and his big tour. Well, he's been really doing the Lord's work, and I'm not sure how it missed me, because I spent the better part of a year trying to do, what he was already doing. Of course, he has, he's got all kinds of street cred that yours truly ain't got. But as a confirmation of the right trackness of my inquiries here and my discussions, I think it works just fine. Lee Bollinger is saying many solid things. However, his career has been, he's a constitutional lawyer, I believe, but he's spent most of his time, if not all of his time, in academia. And so he's interested in the First Amendment and freedom of speech. Now, my gut instinct is that we're confusing several issues. Okay, there's First Amendment, there's freedom of speech. First Amendment, freedom of speech. And woke libtardism, progressive wokeism, or we'll just say wokeism. Wokeism and freedom of speech first of all, who's woke? Because everybody's getting all bent out of shape about identity. I'll put it this way. How on earth is everybody across the board missing the virtue of reason? Not the virtue of reason like you'll be you'll be morally respectable if you sound fancy or tedious or whatever. No. Sounding tedious is not the goal, even though it quite often turns out that way. Because when you're being careful, it's like it is tedium to be careful. What passes for argument at the mainstream high levels of society, if those are high levels. See, rational argumentation does a number of things at once, and I'm preoccupied right now with the idea of paradoxical thing that is real. Rigorous argumentation can be both welcoming and off-putting. It is, I'm sitting here just silent, trying to think of how to describe it. Because at 1 minute, you know very well, I'm prone to say, oh, just annihilate the argument, destroy the argument. Cast it into oblivion. Render it worthless in smithereens on the ground, in the sewer. That sort of colorful language about destroying arguments. And it's a very violent language. Well, I make it violent language for a reason, because I figure that human aggression should be restricted to reason. The arts, maybe sports and stuff, but not human reason. Drive, id, libido, aggression, human aggression. There is no reason. In fact, there are very many reasons, strong reasons, against being aggressive toward one another in the sense of violence. So, in my experience, it works rather well. You got some of my first exposure to serious, formal, rigorous argumentation was speech and debate in high school, and we had, as some of you know, we had a very wildly popular speech and debate program because of the instructor was a very serious man. He was very funny. Ricardo Lara, outstanding sense of fashion, always wore suits and shirt and just crisp. And everybody took speech and debate. Jocks, nerds, whatever. And of course the nerds whipped up on the jocks and they got a little bit of respect. Or a lot of respect. The speech gods, medallion winners, speech gods and medallion winners, and we had Speaker of the Year, male and female, every year. Very aggressive, and bombastic debate. Ad hominem, full-on ad hominem bombastic debate. You had some people, I never did it. I whether I was afraid to or I didn't feel like I could think on my toes, too nervous or whatever, but so I just stuck to good old-fashioned clear reasons. But I ran the room. My skills turned out to be probably the more respectable and probably the more admirable, because everybody knew that the real exciting, salacious stuff literally was just mudslinging. You get two people debating and they'd just be name calling. Look at what this idiot's wearing. Can you imagine? He had a debate today, and he wore that. Don't fall for his shit. Improper language not allowed. Ad hominem, yeah. Ad hominem bombastic, in other words. Ad hominem because, real personal questions not allowed. Personal questions not allowed. They were immaterial to the subject of objective inquiry. So a lot of violence, a lot of hostility, but nobody is losing their dignity. And in fact, it was really built a sense of community and augmented, bolstered our sense of dignity, human dignity. Violence and aggression of discourse. And, personally, I have always, it's an interesting way, I think it's interesting anyway, way of reading my entire intellectual history is like I'm looking for the gnarly arguments. The highest level shit I can find. The most far out, the most far-fetched. Hell yeah. It's like UFC, but 100 times better. So there's the destructive, hostile, violent part, but then there's also what I said about the camaraderie. It brings together. It's kind of mysterious. It brings together. And so all my yammering about Gottlob Frege and everything, what I'm trying to get us to do is have very serious, extended, careful discussions about the matters at hand in a way where we intend to make real progress and we can actually solve problems, because we know how to do it. Our founders, late 1700s, this is 100 years before Gottlob Frege. They simply did not have the luxury in the founding era phase. They did not have modern logic at their disposal. So they framed a government that's quasi in the spirit of an axiomatic formal system quite a bit before axiomatic formal systems really start showing up. piano arithmetic and Russell Frege, Wittgenstein, and all this. Turn of the 20th century. So they devised a government in an axiomatic formal style akin to something like Euclid or Spinoza, right? But they couldn't go the distance with the formalism itself, so the furthest reaches they can think are in purely pragmatic terms. Decentralized, several centers of power that will compete. They will compete with one another because of pragmatism, human nature, the fallibility of human nature, greed. Greed for identity. Greed for identity, pride in one's station. The pride in the station of, say, the legislative branch. One has pride. One is a lawmaker, therefore no one could dream of a whole body of government basically abdicating. At the expense of their pride. Belonging at the expense of pride. Fuck. Look, one way or the other, if there is any real chutzpah and gumption in this country, it's going to be rational. And it's going to be rigorous, and it's going to be sustained. And if modern logicians 120 years after Gottlob Frege, or 100 years after Gottlob Frege, if modern logicians have anything to say about the axiomatic system, if we propose it, called the U.S. Constitution, Augustine Ryo, Hartree Field, David Chalmers, Brandon Fiddleson, Tina Eliasirad, and Penelope Maddy. And don't forget, Sally Haslinger and Stephen Yablo, David Kaplan, Von Lingle, Mungo, Van Lingle, Van Lingle.